In October 2018, 13-year-old Jamie Kloss disappeared after a horrifying night that rocked the quiet town of Barron, Wisconsin. Her mother placed a panicked call to 911. But after that, there was only silence. Shortly thereafter, both of Jamie's parents were found murdered in their home while Jamie was nowhere to be found. The investigation became a race against time as signs pointed to a carefully orchestrated kidnapping. For 88 days, people across the country followed the case with growing concern, as each new detail only deepened the mystery. Why would someone target a peaceful family in such a quiet town? And how did a young girl manage to escape from her captor? Let's look at the chilling facts of the Jamie Kloss case. Jamie Lynn Kloss was born on July 13, 2005 in Barron, Wisconsin to parents James and Denise Kloss. The small family lived in a modest home in a town of just 3,400 people where everyone seemed to know one another. Jamie was described as a cheerful, kind-hearted girl who loved to dance, spend time with her friends, and participate in school activities. James, 56, and Denise, 46, were well known in the community for their steady jobs at the Gino Turkey Store. They were recognized as hardworking, kind-hearted parents who deeply loved their only child. Neighbors admired the Kloss family, whose simple life revolved around work, home, and supporting Jamie's interests. On the day everything changed, Jamie was in the 8th grade at Riverview Middle School, where she was known as a bright, cheerful girl who brought positivity wherever she went. Their home was made complete by Molly, the family dog whom Jamie adored. The Colossus had no known conflicts or enemies, which made the tragedy all the more disturbing. The crime that shattered their lives shocked everyone who knew them. Up until the night of October 15, 2018, they were simply living in peace. Until 21-year-old Jake Patterson arrived at their home with a shotgun and a deadly plan. Jake Thomas Patterson was born in Barron and grew up in Gordon, Wisconsin, about 70 miles away. He preferred solitude and struggled to maintain steady employment after a brief stint in the Marine Corps. After his parents separated, Patterson lived in a rundown shack with his father. Prior to this incident, he had no criminal record. However, he had been planning this night for weeks. He had driven to the Kloss family home 3 times before attempting to kidnap 13-year-old Jamie Kloss. But each time he backed off out of fear of being seen. Patterson was resolute on his 3rd attempt. Just before 12:53 a.m., he parked his car at the end of the driveway to avoid being noticed. Removing his ski mask and black coat, he approached the house carrying a shotgun. The family dog's barking roused James Kloss inside. Concerned and curious, James went to the door and saw Patterson lurking in the shadows through the glass. Believing the man might be a police officer, James shone his flashlight and asked to see his badge. Patterson didn't respond with his name. Instead, he commanded sharply, "Open the door." Sensing danger, James hesitated. In response, Patterson swiftly raised his shotgun and fired a single, deafening shot through the glass. The moment the bullet struck James, he died instantly. Patterson then forced his way into the house, uncovering even more horrifying scenes inside. What began as a quiet night quickly turned into chaos, as the Kloss family home became the scene of a brutal crime that would leave a lasting scar on the community. Denise Kloss and her daughter Jamie were awakened by the sound of shattering glass and the thunderous blast of a shotgun. Recognizing the danger, they fled to the bathroom and locked the door behind them. Despite the growing turmoil outside, Denise held Jamie close, trying to soothe her fears. Moments later, Jake Patterson broke into the house without hesitation. Methodically moving through the rooms, he was determined to eliminate any witnesses. When he reached the locked bathroom door, he relentlessly pounded on it, each blow growing louder and more terrifying. Desperate for help, Denise managed to call 911, but the call abruptly ended after just a few seconds. Before the call disconnected, the dispatcher heard shouting and chaos, but the operator couldn't make out what was being said and was left confused about the situation. Patterson then violently smashed the door down. Inside, Denise and Jamie were terrified as Patterson approached them. Fully armed and in control, he ordered Denise to use duct tape to bind Jamie's wrists and ankles. Despite trembling and pleading, Denise had no choice but to obey. Jamie's eyes were wide with fear mirroring her mother's as Denise struggled to complete the dreadful task. Suddenly, Patterson raised his shotgun and fired a fatal shot at Denise, killing her instantly in front of Jamie. Forced to witness this brutal act, Jamie's world shattered. After both parents were dead, Patterson dragged Jamie out of the house. Jamie couldn't scream or resist because she was bound and gagged. Patterson had to carry her outside carefully since the blood on the floor made it slippery. Just 4 minutes after the 911 call, police arrived at the Kloss home. But by then, Patterson and Jamie had already vanished. Patterson had quickly pulled over to the roadside, allowing police cars with sirens and flashing lights to pass by without suspicion. What the officers didn't realize was that the kidnapper and his victim were right there beside them. At the crime scene, the bodies of James and Denise Kloss were discovered. The 911 call and other evidence confirmed a violent home invasion and abduction had taken place. The search for Jamie began immediately. Patterson had taken her to a remote house in Gordon, Wisconsin, roughly 70 miles from her family's home. The secluded cabin was an ideal hiding spot for Patterson because it was remote and surrounded by dense forest. At the cabin, he forced Jamie to wear his sister's clothes, tightening his control over her. Throughout her captivity, Patterson controlled every aspect of Jamie's life. She was confined beneath a bed in his room, surrounded by storage bins and heavy objects that acted as makeshift walls. Jamie was often forced to remain there for extended periods, sometimes up to 12 hours, without food, water, or access to a bathroom. Whenever Patterson left the house, he played loud music to mask any sounds Jamie might make. When visitors like Patterson's father came by, he would hide Jamie under the bed and warn her of severe consequences if she attempted to escape. Patterson believed that Jamie's fear of him would prevent her from attempting to escape. He held complete control over her and made it clear that disobedience would not be tolerated. One time when Jamie accidentally shifted one of the large bins blocking her escape, Patterson reacted violently, striking her hard with a curtain rod, intensifying her fear of physical punishment. Despite enduring both physical and emotional abuse, Jamie never lost hope. She stayed silent, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to flee, knowing her chance for freedom depended on acting quickly during a moment of Patterson's inattentiveness. After being held captive for 88 days, Jamie finally spotted an unexpected opportunity to escape on January 10, 2019. As usual, Patterson had locked her beneath the bed, barricading the entrance with heavy bins and other obstacles. But this time, when Patterson told her he would be gone for a while, Jamie realized it was her moment. As soon as he left, she moved swiftly. She pushed aside the heavy bins and weights trapping her, every movement fueled by her will to survive. Despite the biting cold, she ran outside wearing only a light shirt, leggings, and Patterson's shoes. Her heart pounded as she kept running through the freezing air. Driven by a fierce determination to break free, Jamie's luck changed when John Nutter spotted her while walking his dog, H. Recognizing her from the news, John approached her. Gasping for breath and still in shock, Jamie told him, "My name is Jamie Kloss. They were killed and he took me." Without hesitation, John took Jamie to the nearby home of Kristen and Peter Kacinskas. With their help, 911 was called and the police arrived quickly. Though Jamie appeared calm, she was visibly lost and confused after her ordeal. After 88 days, Jamie finally felt safe and was able to breathe freely again. Deputies responded swiftly, removing her from the area immediately to ensure her safety. She provided the police with detailed information about Patterson and his vehicle, which proved crucial in tracking him down. Just minutes later, officers spotted Patterson driving near his home. Aware that Jamie had escaped, he was desperately searching for her. When police pulled him over, Patterson quickly stepped out of his car and confessed, "I did it." His 88-day reign of terror over Jamie ended with his immediate arrest and imprisonment. The quick response from law enforcement, combined with Jamie's courage in sharing vital information, led to his capture. The nightmare was over and hope was restored for everyone following her story. During questioning, Patterson admitted to murdering James and Denise Kloss and holding Jamie hostage. Patterson said he first noticed Jamie in September 2018 while on his way to work. Watching her board a school bus sparked his interest, and he decided she was the girl he wanted to abduct. Though he had no prior criminal record and no connection to the Kloss family, Patterson carefully planned the kidnapping. However, he later claimed the crime was spontaneous rather than premeditated, revealing a chilling and detached mindset. According to him, the act was a sudden decision, not the result of a long-term scheme. This explanation puzzled investigators and the community even more, as Patterson had never met Jamie or had any clear motive to target her. The horrific events left the small town of Barron in shock. Yet, the community rallied around Jamie. The support from local businesses and residents demonstrated their deep care. Hormel Foods, the owner of the Geno plant where James and Denise worked, awarded Jamie $25,000 in recognition of her bravery and strength. This overwhelming show of support helped Jamie begin to heal and offered a beacon of hope amid the tragedy. The courage of the young girl who fought for her life became a beacon of hope not only for Barron, but for many others as well. On January 14, 2019, Patterson was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional murder and 1 count of kidnapping. Due to the severity of the charges, his bail was set at $5 million. In March 2019, Patterson sent a letter to a reporter expressing remorse for his actions and stating his intention to plead guilty to spare Jamie and her family the ordeal of a trial. True to his word, he entered a guilty plea later that month. On May 24, 2019, Patterson was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 40 years for the kidnapping charge. A letter written by Jamie was read aloud in court in her place, describing the pain of losing her parents and the struggle to feel safe again. She told Patterson that despite his attempts to control her, he was wrong to think he owned her. Patterson was then transferred to a maximum security prison in New Mexico. Patterson was also charged with sex crimes and will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Meanwhile, Jamie reunited with her family and began the difficult process of rebuilding her life. She now lives with her aunt and uncle, surrounded by people who support her healing. Her aunt, Jennifer Nybergmith, shared that Jamie takes each day as it comes. Though adjusting to her new life has been challenging, Jamie finds joy in activities like dance and school. Jennifer expressed her gratitude to Jan Nutter, Kristen, and Peter Kacinskas and the police for their role in rescuing Jamie. Additionally, Jamie is thankful to the entire community for their unwavering support. Her story has become a powerful symbol of resilience and hope. Inspired by her courage, she has become an advocate for missing and abused children. These days, many people carry pepper spray or a similar self-defense tool whenever they step out. It has become almost as common as carrying cash or keys. With the way the world is now, it feels essential. But when crimes continue to happen, it pushes people, even college students, to consider something more extreme, like owning a gun for protection. That's right. Students are carrying deadly weapons. And that's exactly what today's case is about. Brian Dennison, a 19-year-old junior studying child psychology at Santa Barbara City College, vanished from his friend's home in Reno, Nevada. It was the kind of nightmare no one ever wants to imagine. What could be worse than being taken from a place that felt safe in the middle of the night? As the investigation unfolded, more disturbing details emerged, fueling fear and unease. Violence, heartbreak, and a devastating outcome became central to Brianna Dennison's tragic case. A winter break that ended in horror. Brianna, known to friends and family as Bree, was born on March 29, 1988 to Jeff and Bridget. She grew up in a small, tightly bonded family with her younger brother, Brighton. The Dennis were living comfortably in Reno, Nevada, where Jeff ran a business. But their stability was shattered in 1994 when Jeff, just 34 years old, took his own life while facing a federal embezzlement investigation. Bree was only 6 at the time. His decision left the family broken, forcing them to endure an immense and lasting loss. Though the loss devastated them, the family leaned on each other and slowly rebuilt their lives. Bridget, Bree, and Brighton shared a bond full of love and support. As a single mother, Bridget worked tirelessly to provide her children with everything they needed. Bree, bright and outgoing from a young age, brought joy to those around her. Still, Jeff's death had left deep scars that the family struggled to heal from. Not long after, they relocated to Mendocino, California, where Bridget had grown up, and the move brought Bree a fresh start. She thrived socially, making friends easily with her warm, approachable nature. Bree graduated from Reno High School in 2006 and soon set her sights on college. She pursued child psychology at Santa Barbara City College in California, eager to follow her passion. At the time of the case, Bree was a junior in college, and those who knew her best believed she had chosen the perfect field of study. She also had a passion for travel. A year abroad in Rome, Italy, gave her a taste of the world, sparking adventures that later took her to Hawaii, New York, Mexico, Jamaica, Japan, Italy, Egypt, Hungary, Austria, France, and more. Though just 19, Bree embraced life fully, creating memories and following what felt right for her. She also shared a close, loving bond with her younger brother, Brighton. As his big sister, Bree offered guidance and advice he could count on, always being a steady source of support, just as many hope their older siblings will be. Brighton truly did look up to Bree that way. By all accounts, she was a warm, joyful young woman who was thriving in college and had an exciting future ahead. But everything changed in January 2008 when tragedy struck during her winter break in Reno. It was yet another devastating blow for the Dennis family. That January, Bree returned to Reno to reconnect with her high school friends. Together, they planned to attend several events organized by Summer Winter Action Tours LLC, a company known for hosting student activities. Their plans also included celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, making it a trip filled with anticipation and fun until it turned into something far darker. On the night of January 19th, Bree and her friends had a packed schedule. They attended events filled with music and activities, enjoying themselves to the fullest. One highlight was a party at the Sands Regency Resort, now known as J Resort, on North Arlington Avenue. Time slipped away quickly, and before they realized it, midnight had already passed. That night, Bree, her friend Jessica, and their host Katie were staying at Katie's off-campus apartment on my court near the University of Nevada. When Katie and Bree returned, Jessica was already there with a man no one recognized, as she wanted to get some rest before work the following day. Once home, Katie and Bree changed into their night clothes and headed straight to bed. For reasons of her own, Bree chose to sleep in the living room. She set up a makeshift bed on the couch with a pillow, 2 blankets, and a stuffed bear. Katie went off to her own room. To give some context, the apartment had a front glass door that the roommates never locked. Their reasoning was simple. If anyone lost their keys and no one was home, they could still get inside easily. Looking back, it was far from a wise decision, but college students aren't exactly known for making the safest choices. The girls believed they were fine since nothing bad had ever happened before. Unfortunately, just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't. That false sense of security led to a devastating mistake, one that Bree's friends and the Dennis family would carry with them forever. Phone records revealed that Bree spoke with her boyfriend Cameron that night. They had been together since their freshman year of college. During the call, they argued about her going to late-night parties. But eventually they made up, and Bree appeared to have fallen asleep afterward. The next morning, January 20th, around 9 a.m., Jessica and Katie woke up and began their day. They noticed Bree was no longer on the couch, but assumed she had moved to her bedroom during the night. Since everything seemed normal, they didn't think twice. However, as the hours passed and Bree never came out, their concern grew. When they finally went to check her room, they realized she wasn't there either. It appeared Bree had never gone into her bedroom at all. When Jessica and Katie returned to the living room, something immediately caught their attention. One blanket remained on the couch, but the other was lying on the kitchen floor near the back door. Far from where Bree had been sleeping, her stuffed bear was missing too. Most unsettling of all, a red stain marked the pillow she had used. Panicked, Katie and Jessica quickly called Bridget, Bree's mother, to tell her something terrible had happened. Bree's wallet, phone, and bag were still in the apartment, suggesting she hadn't taken them with her. Alarmed, Bridget dialed 911. Officers arrived promptly, but as they searched the apartment, they found no signs of forced entry or missing belongings. Because the front door had been left unlocked, investigators believe Bree was most likely taken during the night, a chilling possibility. But the details on the pillow raised even more questions. On closer inspection, officers noticed 3 red stains along with smudges of mascara covering one side. They theorized Bree might have been crying during her phone argument with Cameron, which could explain the mascara. But the stains were more troubling, and their cause couldn't be determined right away. What unsettled police most, however, was the discovery of tiny punctures on the pillow. Marks they could only describe as resembling bite marks. In other words, Bree likely wasn't just crying into that pillow. She was being forced down onto it to muffle her screams. Investigators sealed off the apartment for a forensic examination. Tests revealed male DNA on the couch and doorknob along with Bree's DNA on the bloodstained pillow. With her still missing, the case quickly escalated and the FBI was brought in to assist. The investigation was complex and unsettling. Bree had been taken from a place she believed was safe, and there was no sign of her whereabouts. What made matters worse was the fact that several women in the area had been violently assaulted in recent months, raising the likelihood that her abductor was a repeat offender. Detectives began their work by questioning Bree's family, closest friends, and the last people to have spoken with her. Among the people questioned were Cameron, Bree's boyfriend, and the man who had given Jessica a ride home. Both, however, had solid alibis and DNA results ruled them out as suspects. Still, investigators had to chase down every possible lead. On January 29, 2008, 9 days after Bree's disappearance, a woman stepped forward. She reported that a friend of hers had been robbed in the University of Nevada parking lot. It was tragic that she had been targeted, but she hadn't seen the attacker's face. All she could recall was that he was white and drove a blue pickup truck, possibly a 2007 or 2008 Toyota Tacoma. After the incident, she went to the police station to file a report and provide a DNA sample. After learning this, investigators compared Bree's DNA evidence with the DNA from the other woman to see if the same person was responsible. Shockingly, it was a match. The same individual who had attacked the woman in the parking lot was the one who had taken Bree. While Bree's family struggled to accept this news, it at least pushed the investigation forward. With this breakthrough, detectives shared what they had uncovered, hoping someone might come forward with more information. Soon, another woman reported that she too had been violently attacked in the same area. In a way strikingly similar to Bree's abduction, one detail connected all these crimes. The attacker always stole something from the victim as a trophy. Keeping women's underwear as a reminder of such cruel and violent attacks is deeply disturbing. On the other hand, one of the victims had managed to see part of the attacker's face, which allowed a composite sketch to be created in hopes of identifying him and finding Bree before time ran out. The search for Bree grew massive, spanning nearly 100 square miles. Countless volunteers joined the effort, including Nevada's First Lady, Dawn Gibbons, the wife of Governor Jim Gibbons. Since the first 2 victims of this predator had survived, Bree's mother, Bridget, still clung to hope that her daughter might also be found alive and returned home. Investigators also reviewed lists of violent offenders in the area where Bree had disappeared, but nothing turned up, at least not right away. Then in February 2008, nearly a month after she went missing, someone finally discovered her. On February 15th, Albert Jimenez, an employee at E-Technologies, was returning from a lunch break at a Reno subway when he noticed something unusual. On the side of the road near an empty lot, he spotted what looked like a doll dressed in bright orange socks. But as is often the case, it wasn't a doll. As he got closer, the horrifying reality set in. It was the body of a woman. Shocked, Albert ran back to his workplace and immediately called the police. Even before officers arrived, it was clear something was terribly wrong. Lying next to the body were 2 pairs of underwear, one belonging to Bree and the other harder to identify. Before long, The remains were confirmed to be those of 19-year-old Bree Dennison. The devastating news was almost unbearable for her family. Despite all their hopes and preparations, their worst nightmare had become reality. The autopsy results were equally grim. Bree had suffered severe injuries, and investigators believed the killer had likely ended her life with bare hands. But when police shared these details with Bree's loved ones, her friend Katie noticed that something didn't quite add up. One of the unidentified pairs of underwear found with Bree's body turned out to belong to Katie. This raised unsettling questions. How had the killer gotten her clothing? The only explanation was chilling. He must have entered their house unnoticed, moving from room to room while searching for his intended victim. The thought terrified everyone. Yet, there were still no solid leads pointing to who the attacker was. Although the Dennis family desperately wanted justice, it took investigators more than 10 months to make a real breakthrough. The turning point came when someone close to the perpetrator finally decided to come forward. That critical moment arrived on November 1, 2008. While returning from Washington State, where her husband had started a new job in March, a woman confided in her best friend that she had discovered several pairs of women's underwear in his truck. Seeing the disturbing similarity to recent violent crimes, the friend decided to contact authorities through the secret witness program. The man she reported was 27-year-old James Michael Bella, a former resident of Sparks, Nevada. He had worked various jobs, including repair work and pipe fitting, and had briefly served in the military before being discharged for drug use. He also held a blue belt in martial arts and was known for having a short, volatile temper. James was also a husband and father. Ironically, he was arrested while dropping off his son at the Reno Stepping Stones Children's Center. He faced charges of murder and first-degree kidnapping. Yet, when questioned, James denied any involvement and refused to provide a DNA sample. Detectives realized he wouldn't cooperate easily, so they had to get creative. They persuaded James' wife to provide their son's DNA, and she agreed. Testing revealed that a close relative of the boy had left DNA at the house where Bree was abducted. With this evidence, investigators felt certain they had finally identified the killer. The DNA from James matched not only the evidence found on Bree's body, but also that of 2 other victims. With this definitive proof, investigators secured both an arrest warrant and a DNA warrant for him. In the end, James walked right into the trap set by police, betrayed by his own wife's cooperation. In a way, his son had also played a part in bringing him down. A deeper look into James' past revealed he had been arrested back in 2001 for threatening his lover's neighbor with a knife. Police also tracked down his blue pickup truck, which matched the description given by one of the victims. Although he had already sold it, investigators managed to locate the vehicle and test it for evidence. Fibers from Bree's clothing on the night she was abducted were found in James' truck, further linking him to the crime. As expected, he pleaded not guilty, and a hearing was scheduled. If convicted, James faced either life in prison without parole or the death penalty. His trial began on May 12, 2010, and lasted about 15 days. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Coworkers, past victims, and even his own wife testified. Prosecutors argued that James had been near my court on January 20th, prowling for someone to attack. That's when he spotted Bree through the living room window at Katie's apartment. Seeing her asleep, he decided she would become his next victim. Since the door had been left unlocked, James entered without difficulty. He assaulted Bree, abducted her, and drove her to a remote location in his truck. There, he ended her life to avoid being caught, but only after violating her in a way that shattered her dignity. Bree had been peacefully asleep when it all began. Imagining the terror she must have felt is unbearable. In court, James' boss testified as well. He described how James grew restless and erratic after Bree's body was discovered. Even more disturbing, the boss recalled James saying that Bree had it coming when asked about her death. The reality, though, was that she hadn't done anything at all. She was simply asleep in her own home when he decided to take everything from her. How many mental gymnastics did this man go through? And yet there was more, as if it made any difference. James' defense team tried to portray him as a deeply troubled man with a history of abuse. Sure, A painful past can explain behavior, but it can never excuse it. They also asked the jury to show leniency because James had supposedly been a model inmate, whatever that's supposed to mean. Personally, the words model and inmate don't even belong in the same sentence. In the end, James was convicted on all counts on May 27, 2010. The most shocking moment came on July 30, 2010, when he was sentenced to death just 2 months later. In addition, he received 4 life sentences for the kidnappings and assaults of 2 other victims prior to Bree's murder. Every one of the surviving victims testified in court. They not only identified James before the judge, but also confronted him directly. One woman even asked him to meet her eyes as she spoke. Yet he refused. Her courage was remarkable. She understood this wasn't just about her own healing, but also about honoring Bree. She recognized it was her final chance to speak out against him. Yet, instead of lashing out, she chose to stand strong and fearless. Thanks to her, the other victim, and the relentless efforts of investigators, James will never be able to harm anyone again. After Bree's tragic death on February 23, 2008, a memorial gathering was held. Attendees wore blue, her favorite color, and left flowers, notes, photos, and ribbons in memory of the 19-year-old, who still had so much life ahead of her. Breanna's law was later enacted in Nevada, requiring all convicted felons, regardless of the severity of their crimes, to submit DNA samples for entry into a criminal database. If this law had been in place earlier, James' 2001 arrest would have put his DNA into the system, and Bree's case might not have dragged on for nearly a year. For Bree's family, the grief remains overwhelming. Bridget and Brighton had already endured the loss of a husband and father, and now they also carry the pain of losing Bree. To simply say it's hard doesn't come close to capturing what they've endured. Their struggle to move forward is far heavier than most of us could ever imagine. After Bree's case drew widespread attention, many people rushed to buy guns, pepper spray, and personal safety devices, especially around the University of Nevada. And honestly, who could blame them? A man with a history of violent attacks had escalated to murder, taking the life of someone completely innocent. Bree had felt safe where she was, but this tragedy left the community shaken, making people feel unsafe, even in their own homes. Even locked doors couldn't protect against the horror of one man's twisted plans. Years have passed since then, and I can only hope the Dennison family has managed to find some measure of peace. From what's known, Bree's brother, Brighton, has built a life and now has a 4-year-old child. As for her mother, Bridget, her journey is less clear, but I hope she's found a way to keep moving forward. Losing a husband and then a daughter in such a short span is more than anyone should ever have to endure. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. When a young woman suddenly went silent and stopped answering her phone, her family knew right away something was wrong. The police got involved, and at first it seemed like the mystery of her disappearance would be solved quickly. But what followed felt more like the plot of a crime drama than real life. And when the full truth finally came out, it sent shockwaves across the entire country. Andrea Ilber was born on April 17, 1991, in Flint, Michigan. When she was little, her mother passed away, and after some time, her father remarried. The family eventually moved to the small town of Otisville, where Andrea finished high school. After graduation, she got a job at a supermarket not far from home. Andrea thought about going to college, but she wasn't sure what direction to take yet, so she kept working and saving up for the future. That's also where she met a coworker, a 19-year-old named Kenneth, and before long, the two started dating. In November 2011, when Andrea was 20 years old, her aunt and uncle went out of town and asked her to look after their house. At the time, Andrea was still living with her parents, so she decided to stay at her relative's place until they came back. For the first few days, her boyfriend Kenneth and one of their friends came over. They'd hang out, watch movies, and just have fun together. After that, Andrea and Kenneth made plans to spend the next day together. Andrea was supposed to pick him up on the evening of November 14th, but shortly before that, She texted him to say she couldn't make it. Instead, she told him to come over to her aunt and uncle's place and asked him to bring along some movie DVDs. Kenneth showed up around 7:30 p.m., but the house was dark. The doors were locked, and Andrea's car wasn't there. He knocked, but no one answered. He then tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. Thinking she might have stepped out for a bit, he decided to wait. About half an hour later, he finally got a text from her. Andrea said her plans had changed and promised they'd see each other the next day. She didn't explain where she had gone, and none of Kenneth's follow-up messages ever got a reply. The next day came and went, and Andrea still didn't reach out. At first, Kenneth was the only one worried. Since she was staying at her aunt and uncle's place, Andrea's dad didn't think much of it when he didn't hear from her. But by the following day, when Andrea wasn't answering his calls either, he started to get anxious. He asked another relative to check out the house, and she went there with Kenneth. They walked around, looked through the windows, but the place was empty. Her father then started calling Andrea's friends, and none of them had heard from her in more than 24 hours. That's when her family began to fear something bad had happened, so they decided it was time to start searching. Andrea's family and friends split up into groups and started driving around nearby towns, parks, and anywhere else she might have gone. By evening, one of her friends spotted her car. It was parked in a remote area near a national park, just a few miles from her relative's house. The doors were unlocked and the keys were missing, but there was no sign of Andrea herself. Her father immediately called police, who then contacted Andrea's uncle, and with his permission, officers forced their way into the house. When they went down into the basement, they were met with a horrifying sight. Andrea was sitting in a chair, with a gunshot wound to her head. Her body was taken to the medical examiner, who determined she'd been killed by a single shot fired from several feet away. As for the timeline, Andrea had been murdered 2 days before her body was found. On the very night she had planned to spend time with Kenneth, but suddenly canceled. The examiner also discovered markings on her wrists showing that they'd been bound with plastic zip ties, though by the time police found her, those restraints were gone. Even stranger, the analysis suggested they had been removed about 6 or 7 hours after her death, implying either the killer came back later or stayed in the house for most of the night. Investigators also learned that some items were missing from the house, but the scene didn't look like a typical burglary. Almost all valuables were left untouched. Instead, the killer had taken things like a bottle of perfume, a sweater, a camera, 3 knives, a rifle, some bullets, and a bit of cash. Meanwhile, jewelry and even a small piece of solid gold that was sitting out in plain view were left behind. While crime scene techs combed through the house, detectives learned Andrea had a boyfriend and headed straight to Kenneth's place. He told them when he'd last seen her and handed over a DNA sample and fingerprints without hesitation. Police also collected the clothes he'd worn that night and searched his house. But nothing suspicious turned up. Still, they brought Kenneth back in for more questioning, and over time, detectives started leaning toward the theory that he was the killer. Kenneth denied it all and even agreed to take a polygraph, which showed no signs of deception. He explained that on the night of November 14th, after Andrea suddenly canceled their plans, he was crushed. He figured the only reason she'd backed out was because she was planning to break up with him. So, he went home, plugged in his phone, and messaged a female friend, telling her Andrea was probably about to dump him. They texted back and forth for a while, and then Kenneth drove to the store where that friend worked. The two continued talking about the situation, and eventually she told him she and her roommate were planning to watch a movie that night and invited him over. Kenneth showed up at their place around 10 p.m., something both girls later confirmed. On top of that, his phone data backed him up, showing it connected to a nearby cell tower at that time. About 20 minutes earlier, he was also caught on a surveillance camera at a gas station located between the store and the girl's house. That same night, police learned that someone had withdrawn $300 from Andrea's bank card. The transaction happened in a town called Davison, about a 30-minute drive from her uncle's house. But here's the catch. The withdrawal was made just 7 minutes after Kenneth showed up at his friend's place. There was simply no way he could have been in both places, yet detectives weren't ready to cross him off the suspect list. Kenneth stayed with his friends until around midnight, then headed home. The next morning, He tried calling Andrea several times, but she never picked up. Concerned, he drove back to her relative's house around 10 a.m. and knocked on the door, but there was still no sign of her, so he left. By about 11 a.m., he was back home, something confirmed by both his family members and his phone's location data. At almost the exact same time, another $300 was withdrawn from Andrea's account, this time in a different town even farther away. Police also got hold of surveillance footage showing the person using her card. The quality was too poor to make out a face, but one detail stood out. The suspect had arrived in a white pickup truck. But even with all the evidence pointing away from him, police still weren't ready to let Kenneth off the hook. They thought there were a few things about his story that didn't add up. First, he had admitted that he drove to Andrea's relative's house right around the time she was killed, and sat in his car outside for about half an hour, which sounded weird for detectives. Second, when Andrea's friends and family organized a search for her on the evening of November 15th, Kenneth told them he wouldn't be joining because he had to work early the next morning. Later, he explained to detectives that he'd already spent the entire day trying to find her, calling her over and over, and figured she was just ignoring him. In his mind, Andrea had probably decided to break up with him, not that something bad had happened. Another red flag came up when one of Kenneth's friends, who'd been out searching for Andrea, asked him for the address of her relative's house. For some reason, Kenneth gave him the wrong location, about 3 miles from the real one. Investigators thought this was strange since Kenneth had spent plenty of time there before. None of this was solid proof of guilt, but detectives pressed him harder and harder, piling on over 10 hours of interrogations. And eventually, police announced that Kenneth had finally confessed to the crime. In his written confession, Kenneth claimed that he went over to Andrea's that night and walked into the house. When he went down to the basement, he said he saw her body lying on the floor and assumed she did it herself. According to him, that's when he decided to stage the scene to look like a murder, so her family wouldn't find out the truth. He admitted to taking a few items that were lying nearby, but offered little else. The confession itself was short, vague, and full of ambiguous wording. Kenneth insisted he hadn't killed Andrea, only that he'd found her body. But detectives believed they finally had what they needed, and they placed him under arrest. The moment police told him he was being charged with murder, Kenneth immediately tried to retract his statement. He said detectives had pressured him for hours, hammering him with accusations until he was completely exhausted. Finally, they told him that if he just wrote down a version of events where he found Andrea's body, they would let him go home. Kenneth said he believed them, but instead, his so-called confession became the cornerstone of the case against him. He also claimed detectives repeatedly misled him. They told him they had solid, forensic evidence tying him to the crime and that he had failed the polygraph miserably. But the most shocking detail came out later. Kenneth's grandfather had actually hired a lawyer and sent him to the station to help. When the attorney tried to find out where Kenneth was being held, one of the detectives simply hung up the phone and then warned his colleagues not to reveal Kenneth's location to anyone. The lawyer spent the entire day calling every officer he could reach, but no one would give him answers. Meanwhile, Kenneth had no idea that the lawyer was even trying to reach him, and he continued talking to detectives alone. According to Kenneth, his so-called confession was nothing more than him parroting back what detectives told him to say, just so they'd finally let him go home. In reality, he claimed he had no idea Andrea was even dead. Less than 24 hours after Andrea's body was found, detectives announced they had their killer. Kenneth's friends and family refused to believe he was involved, but at that point, there wasn't much they could do. Meanwhile, police basically shut down the investigation, convinced Kenneth's confession would be enough to secure a conviction. Forensics, however, painted a very different picture. Lab experts tested dozens of samples collected from the house, including skin found under Andrea's fingernails. The DNA turned out to belong to an unknown male, and it was definitively not a match to Kenneth. Later, another sample was recovered from Andrea's car, and it matched that same unidentified man. Then there was the whole deal with Andrea's bank card. Someone had been draining her account, but it clearly wasn't Kenneth, and police still had no clue who that mystery man could be. Despite these glaring red flags, Just days after Kenneth's arrest, detectives claimed they had new evidence. One officer opened the sealed bag containing Kenneth's clothes from the night Andrea vanished and noticed a single bloody hair stuck to his pants. Tests revealed the hair and blood both belonged to Andrea. But this supposed smoking gun had a huge problem. The pants themselves showed no trace of blood, not even microscopic particles. The forensic specialist who examined the item concluded that the hair must have landed there hours after Andrea's death. Because if Kenneth had been wearing those pants during the murder, blood spatter would have been unavoidable. Kenneth's lawyer argued that the hair was most likely contamination. Police had grabbed Kenneth's clothes barely 30 minutes after Andrea's body was found. It was entirely possible that an officer, still carrying trace evidence from the crime scene, accidentally transferred the hair onto the pants while packing up his belongings. Kenneth's lawyer also pushed to have his confession thrown out, arguing that police had deliberately blocked him from seeing his client during questioning. On top of that, portions of the interrogation video had mysteriously gone missing, precisely the parts where, according to Kenneth, detectives were practically feeding him the right answers. The legal back and forth dragged on for 4 years, until the court finally sided with the prosecution and ruled the confession would stay in. During all this time, Kenneth remained out on bail, but he was far from free. He had to wear a GPS ankle monitor and wasn't allowed to leave his house without police approval. The trial began in 2015, and the prosecution leaned on just 2 pillars: Kenneth's confession and the bloody hair found on his pants. Their theory was that the murder was committed during a robbery, even though none of the stolen items ever turned up in Kenneth's possession, and the victim's bank card was clearly used by someone else. The prosecutor tried to smooth over the contradiction by suggesting the robbery was staged. In other words, he argued Kenneth killed Andrea to steal money and valuables, yet also insisted he faked the robbery. This argument was shaky at best, especially since Kenneth's family was well off and he wasn't desperate for cash. The prosecution also pointed to another detail. There were no signs of forced entry at the house, and Kenneth had a spare key. Andrea had given it to him just a few days before she died, so he could stop by whenever he wanted. But Kenneth insisted he had left the key on a table in the house 2 days before her death. His friend, who had been with him that day, backed up his story, and sure enough, police eventually found the spare key right where he said it would be. The defense, on the other hand, pointed to countless inconsistencies in the case and outright sloppy police work. They also highlighted something investigators seemed to ignore. Andrea's car had been taken and later abandoned a few miles from the house. Her father testified that the car had one particular problem. Oil constantly leaked onto the floor under the driver's seat, which meant Andrea's shoes were always stained. By that logic, anyone who drove the car would have gotten oil on their soles too. Yet when experts examined Kenneth's boots, there wasn't a trace of it. The prosecutor fired back with a new theory. Kenneth must have had an accomplice. According to this version, Kenneth killed Andrea while the accomplice took the stolen items, drove off in her car, and used her bank card. But another problem loomed over the prosecutor's case. The murder weapon was never found. Investigators determined that the missing rifle from Andrea's uncle's house didn't match the bullet that killed her, and neither did Kenneth's parents' guns. Finally, Kenneth's lawyer accused police of completely overlooking other viable suspects. From the very beginning, they had tunnel vision on Kenneth and never gave anyone else a serious look. To prove the point, the defense presented a list of 5 potential suspects, and on the top of that list was a man named Jeffrey, a mutual acquaintance of both Kenneth and Andrea. There were a few red flags around Jeffrey. First, he was the one who just happened to find Andrea's car in the early hours of the search, even though it was parked miles away from her house in a fairly secluded spot. Second, that same day he called Kenneth asking questions about Andrea's whereabouts. The odd thing was, Kenneth had never given him his number. Investigators later learned Andrea had scribbled his number on a piece of paper and left it on a nightstand, right next to where an unidentified DNA sample was later recovered. On top of all that, Jeffrey owned a car that looked very similar to the one caught on surveillance footage at a gas station when someone was withdrawing money with Andrea's bank card. Andrea's brother also pointed investigators toward another possible suspect. He admitted that he had been struggling with drugs at the time and owed money to a local dealer. According to him, This dealer somehow knew Andrea had been saving a good amount of cash from her job. That's why her brother believed the dealer might have killed Andrea to get the money he was owed. There was also a young man named David, who came onto police radar after his own father caught in a tip, telling them his son could be involved in Andrea's murder. David already had a criminal history tied to car thefts and assaults, and he even resembled the man seen withdrawing money from Andrea's bank card. Despite all this, detectives claimed they had looked into each of these leads, but couldn't find any hard evidence linking them to the crime. When the trial wrapped up, the jury deliberated for 2 full days before reaching a verdict. In the end, they found Kenneth guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His lawyer immediately filed an appeal. At first, the defense tried to overturn the conviction by arguing that Kenneth's confession was coerced and that police illegally denied him access to a lawyer, but the court rejected that motion. Next, the defense focused on the robbery charge, pointing out that Kenneth was also found guilty of theft, even though none of the stolen items were ever recovered. That appeal also went nowhere, but the third attempt finally paid off. Kenneth's lawyer discovered a serious mistake in the jury paperwork. On the verdict forms, jurors were given 2 separate murder charges to consider: first degree and second degree. For the first degree charge, they had both options, guilty or not guilty. But for second degree, there was only one option listed: guilty. In other words, the jury had no way to find Kenneth not guilty on the second degree charge. Their only choice was to decide how guilty he was. The appeals court couldn't ignore such a major flaw, and in 2018, Kenneth was granted a brand new trial. By that point, he had already spent 3 years behind bars, and after the ruling, he was released on bail once again. Since then, Kenneth's lawyer kept pushing for new evidence, something that could finally point to the real killer. He repeatedly urged police to retest the existing DNA samples, and in 2022, they finally agreed to launch a fresh review. By that time, Kenneth's new trial still hadn't begun, and he remained out on bail. Forensic experts went back through every unidentified male DNA sample connected to the case. But once again, there were no matches in the FBI's database. So they focused on the strongest piece of evidence they had: a cigarette but found outside the house. That sample matched the same man whose skin cells had been discovered under Andrea's fingernails, leaving no doubt he was the real killer. Investigators sent the cigarette but to Othram, a company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. In January 2023, experts reported a breakthrough. By searching public genetic databases and tracing family connections, they had identified a likely suspect. It was a 42-year-old man named Chadwick Modley, someone who had never even come up in the original case files. Detectives learned that at the time of Andrea's murder, Chadwick had been living just 40 minutes away in a neighboring town. They pulled his phone records from November 2011 and found out that on the day Andrea was killed, his phone pinged off a tower near her aunt and uncle's house 23 times. By 2023, Chadwick was living in Utah, working as a delivery driver and staying out of his van. Investigators reached out to local police, asking them to secretly collect something with his DNA on it. But there was a problem. Since Chadwick usually parked in open areas, tailing him without being noticed was nearly impossible. Officers kept watch for 2 months, but they never managed to recover a single item that could yield a DNA sample. So, detectives decided to confront him directly. Armed with a warrant, they approached Chadwick and collected his DNA sample. During the conversation, he denied any involvement in Andrea's death. But soon after, lab results confirmed that his DNA was under Andrea's fingernails, inside her car, and in multiple places around the house. And if that wasn't enough, when police searched his van, they found a revolver. Ballistic tests proved it was the very weapon used to kill Andrea. 2 days after that first talk, police went back out to arrest Chadwick. But he was already gone. Apparently, he just drove in an unknown direction right after the conversation with police. 3 weeks later, he turned up in Montana near the Canadian border, where officers finally caught him. But the drama didn't stop there. While being transported to the airport for extradition back to Michigan, Chadwick managed to escape from a police van. He somehow freed himself from both handcuffs and leg irons and disappeared once again. A few days later, a local sheriff happened to accidentally spot him paddling down a river in a canoe. That sighting led to his second capture, and this time, authorities successfully brought him to Michigan, where he was locked up awaiting trial. Bail was immediately denied. After all, he had already escaped twice. Chadwick pleaded not guilty, and prosecutors began building their case. For local law enforcement, it was a nightmare. They had spent more than a decade insisting Kenneth was the killer, tearing his life apart in the process. And now, the evidence, DNA under Andrea's nails and the actual murder weapon, pointed directly at Chadwick. Investigators even tried to see if there was any link between Kenneth and Chadwick. Some chance they'd work together, but there wasn't. The two men had no ties at all, and Andrea didn't appear to know Chadwick either. At the time of her murder, he was a 32-year-old living in a neighboring town with no connection to her. Still, even with this mountain of new evidence, Kenneth's conviction wasn't thrown out. He remained at home under strict monitoring with an ankle bracelet. What's worse, prosecutors doubled down. They announced they still planned to move forward with a second trial, pushing the theory that Kenneth and Chadwick had committed the murder together. In the end, though, Chadwick's trial never actually happened, because in February 2025, he entered what's known as a no-contest plea, essentially telling the court that he wouldn't fight the charges, but he wasn't going to admit guilt either. He told the judge that he'd been extremely drunk the night Andrea was killed and had no memory of what happened, though he didn't deny his involvement. During that same hearing, a disturbing fact came to light. Some officers had, in fact, looked at Chadwick as a suspect in the very early days of the investigation. But for reasons no one could explain, he never officially made it into the case file. By then, detectives were already fixated on Kenneth, despite the DNA mismatch and the missing murder weapon. In the end, Chadwick was sentenced to life without parole. He also turned to Andrea's family in court and apologized for what he'd done. For Kenneth, though, nothing changed. His attorney immediately demanded that the charges be dropped, but prosecutors flat out refused. They argued that Chadwick's conviction didn't erase Kenneth's alleged role and vowed to move ahead with a second trial. Chadwick himself stated that he didn't know Kenneth or Andrea and had no accomplice, but the state pressed on. That second trial is now set for January 2026, while Kenneth remains stuck under house arrest. Meanwhile, his defense team has secured a well-known forensic expert who reviewed the bloody hair on Kenneth's pants and confirmed what the earlier report suggested, that it could only have landed there a few hours after Andrea's death, not during the crime. Taken together, the DNA, the murder weapon, Chadwick's conviction, and the forensic analysis, Kenneth has a strong chance of finally clearing his name. But the damage has already been done. 14 years of his life have been basically lost. He spent years in prison and years locked inside his own home. Even if the courts recognize his innocence, he'll never get that time back. And if he decides to fight for justice against the officers and prosecutors who did it to him, it could take many more years, with no guarantee he'll ever truly be made whole. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section and don't forget to press the like button. This video will make you rethink just how safe you really are in your own home. Home is meant to be a refuge, a place where you can unwind, step away from social demands, and, above all, feel protected. When that space is invaded, it's not just a breach of privacy, but a deeply shocking and unsettling violation. This case stands out as one of the most senseless and heartbreaking crimes. And the worst part is, it could have been prevented with something as simple as turning a key. Now, we look into the tragic story of Amanda Blackburn. Our journey takes us to Indianapolis, a city celebrated for its close-knit community spirit and small-town warmth, where over 83% of residents identify as Christian. Nicknamed the Crossroads of America, Indianapolis sits at the intersection of routes connecting Michigan, Illinois, Kentucky, and Ohio, a meeting point for people whose paths might otherwise never cross. For the couple at the center of this story, this is an event they wish had never entered their lives. Meet 28-year-old Amanda and her husband, 30-year-old Davy Blackburn, a devoted pastor and his warm, compassionate wife. To many, they embodied the image of the ideal American couple, admired for their faith, kindness, and promising future. Their move from South Carolina had been fueled by a shared mission to bring the Word of God to a new community. Together, they launched Resonant Church in the northern part of Indianapolis, a ministry they began in 2011 with the goal of sharing the gospel's transformative power. While many might picture church founders as older and more seasoned, Amanda and Davy broke that mold. They were young, energetic, and deeply connected to the modern world. Back in 2006, Amanda and Davy first crossed paths at Pensacola Christian College in Florida, and their connection quickly blossomed into a deep and meaningful romance. Amanda was born in the summer of 1987 in Assen, Michigan, to Phil and Robin, a devout Christian couple, her father serving as a pastor. In 1995, the family relocated to Elkhart, Indiana, where Amanda grew up alongside her siblings, Amber and James. She was known for her gentle, caring spirit and shared a close bond with her brother and sister. As a teenager, Amanda stood out for her diligence, excelling academically while also being active in her church community. After graduating from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006, she made the courageous decision to leave home and begin a new chapter in Florida. It was in Florida that Amanda met Davy, a man admired for his warmth, humor, and easygoing charm. Cliché or not, his smile truly had a way of lighting up a room. As they spent more time together, they discovered their dreams and values aligned. Before long, they moved in together and welcomed a dog named Mel into their lives, treating him as if he were their own child. Photos from those days overflowed with joy and affection. By August 2008, just 2 years after meeting, Amanda and Davy's love culminated in marriage, deepening their connection even further. In 2011, they made the move to Indianapolis, pursuing their shared mission of spreading the message of Christ. The relocation also brought Amanda closer to her family, something that became even more meaningful in 2014 when the couple celebrated the arrival of their first child, a son named Weston. As a family, they flourished. Davy found deep fulfillment in his role as a pastor and in helping establish their church, while Amanda stayed active, running marathons with her parents and siblings. Davy maintained his fitness through regular workouts at LA Fitness. Their social media reflected a vibrant, joyful life, full of family, friends, and a growing church community. In 2015, their happiness expanded with the news that they were expecting their second child, a daughter they named Everett Evie Grace Blackburn. Tragically, the bright future they had envisioned was abruptly shattered. On November 10, 2015, what began as a typical workday for Davy quickly turned into a day that would change everything. He rose around 6 a.m. for his morning workout, a feat so early that some might call it proof of divine intervention, given how hard it can be to leave the comfort of bed at that hour. About an hour later, he completed his routine and returned home around 7:30 a.m. Rather than waking Amanda, Davy stepped outside to take a phone call in the car, trying to be considerate. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't have seemed unusual, but that morning would prove far different from any other. When he returned inside, Davy was met with a horrifying scene. Amanda was lying on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. Though she was still breathing, she was unresponsive. Thankfully, their son Weston was upstairs, safe and unharmed. After checking on him, Davy immediately called emergency services, urgently pleading for help to save Amanda. Paramedics arrived quickly, finding Davy at the end of the driveway, his hands covered in blood. Amanda had been shot 3 times, once in the back, once in the arm, and once in the back of the head. Miraculously, she was still alive, but her condition was critical. With every second counting, she was rushed to the hospital in a desperate effort to save her life. Tragically, despite every effort to save her, Amanda and her unborn child passed away the following day, with Davy holding her hand in her final moments. The loss was devastating, leaving Davy to grieve not only his wife, but also the daughter they had been expecting, all on what had started as an ordinary November morning. In the aftermath, 3 urgent questions loomed. How did this happen? Who was responsible? And why Amanda? It was evident that Amanda had been brutally murdered, and someone had to be held accountable. But who could have committed such a crime, and why? Authorities launched an investigation, yet they too were confounded. The Blackmans had no known enemies, outstanding debts, or disputes within their community. They led a peaceful, joyful life and were cherished by those around them. The motive remained a mystery, and the case seemed to raise more questions than it answered. When investigators examined the crime scene, several disturbing clues came to light. Davy and Amanda had trusted their community deeply and rarely locked their front door. On the morning of Amanda's murder, this lack of security allowed her killers to enter without resistance. The normally orderly home was unrecognizable. Large blood spatters and traces of brain matter were scattered about 5 feet from Amanda's body. She was found lying face down, unclothed, with her underwear nearby. Nearby, a scattered pile of mail and bank cards was discovered, though not all of the cards were accounted for. On the counter lay a pack of Swisher cigars, a pair of earphones, and a roll of duct tape, none of which belonged to the Blackmans. Amanda's cell phone was untouched in her bedroom, and their dog Mel, though trapped, was found alive and unharmed. Another key piece of evidence surfaced. Amanda's phone showed a missed call from Chase Bank at 7:53 a.m. on the morning of her death. Detectives soon discovered that the missed call was related to suspicious activity on Amanda's bank account. While the case initially pointed to a tragic home invasion, the presence of so much clear evidence led some to speculate that the scene might have been staged. Critics even questioned the seemingly convenient timing of Davy being away from the house when Amanda was attacked, suggesting it could be more than mere coincidence. Yet, this suspicion didn't hold up under closer scrutiny. Davy's routine was highly predictable, and if the perpetrators knew his schedule, they could have expected him to be out for at least an hour and that the front door would be unlocked. Davy also had multiple confirmed aliases at the gym, further complicating the narrative. Beyond these anomalies, the couple appeared genuinely happy, deeply in love, and excitedly preparing for the arrival of their second child. Despite this, some people were quick to form their own conclusions, especially given the number of scandals involving pastors in recent years. High-profile cases like those of John White, Timothy Tillman, and Helga Fosmo have fueled public skepticism toward religious leaders, and Davy, as a pastor, was not immune. Some even drew parallels to ongoing controversies, such as the Texas megachurch investigation, where leaders were removed for their knowledge of abuse and murder. It's alarming how often such issues go unnoticed, and with mainstream media frequently swayed by outside influences, it's easy to see why many stories slip under the radar. Following Amanda's tragic death, Davy launched a campaign to draw attention to the case. He leveraged social media, local news, interviews, and every available outlet to spread the word, hoping to uncover leads that could help identify Amanda's killer. Unfortunately, this effort inadvertently fueled online speculation, with amateur detectives suggesting Davy himself might have been involved in the crime. Critics pointed to his seemingly controlled demeanor in interviews, his 12-minute delay in calling emergency services, and the speed with which he turned to social media for support. Despite the growing online accusations, Davy's close friends and family stood by him, working to protect him from the harsh scrutiny of public opinion. As often happens in high-profile cases, Davy couldn't escape the impact of the mounting public scrutiny. Meanwhile, authorities fully cleared him of any involvement, turning their attention instead to the events of that tragic morning. While debates about Davy's role persisted online, detectives remained confident that he was not responsible and leaned toward the conclusion that Amanda's death resulted from a home invasion gone terribly wrong. Investigators soon discovered that Amanda's home was not the only one targeted that morning. Her house was one of 3 burglarized in the neighborhood, and several other homes had been hit earlier that same month. This pattern of break-ins strengthened the theory that Amanda's murder was connected to a wider string of crimes in the area. One particularly chilling incident occurred just a week earlier, when a masked intruder broke into a home while the owner was showering. He forced her out at gunpoint and stole valuables, following a pattern that would soon become all too familiar. Robbery targeting high-value items such as jewelry, purses, cell phones, and laptops. At the Blackburn home, however, Very little was taken aside from a credit card and a MacBook, suggesting the intruders were likely interrupted. Naturally, Amanda's tragic death left the neighborhood reeling. In a collective effort to aid the investigation, residents shared their home surveillance footage that would prove to be a critical piece of evidence. One neighbor remembered hearing what she thought were 2 gunshots around 6:30 a.m., though she had dismissed them at the time. As the investigation continued, more neighbors came forward with unsettling accounts. Several reported seeing a shadowy figure dressed in black, who'd pulled tight, talking on a phone around 7 a.m. before getting into a silver Chrysler Sebring. Surveillance footage later confirmed these reports, capturing a masked man lurking in the shadows before entering the vehicle. This car would become a critical piece of evidence in the case. It had been stolen just a few hours earlier at 5:23 a.m. when the owner reported a burglary to Indianapolis police. Although she hadn't seen the thief, she woke to find her porch door open and several items missing, including her cell phone, laptop, purse, car keys, and the Chrysler Sebring itself. The home surveillance footage captured the burglars in action, showing that 3 men were involved in the break-in. Based on the timeline, investigators believe they went directly from stealing the car to targeting Davy and Amanda's home. Even more chilling, after fatally shooting Amanda, the men continued their crime spree. Just an hour later, another burglary was reported, with the same 3 suspects caught on surveillance cameras nearby. It's hard to comprehend. After committing murder during a botched robbery, they carried on as if nothing had happened. With the homeowners away, they casually helped themselves to a wide array of items, including 4 televisions, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany necklace, a sweater, bed sheets, and even a bag of oranges. After their spree, the burglars even took several bottles of wine. A choice that wasn't particularly nutritious but proved incredibly useful for investigators, as the bottles left behind allowed officers to collect DNA evidence. The most pivotal piece of evidence, however, was the stolen car. Although its license plate had been removed, the make, model, and color were still known, giving authorities a crucial lead. In fact, the car was located just 1 day later, abandoned only minutes from the crime scene. Inside, investigators discovered a range of items, including an oversized men's sweater, a bag of oranges, a universal remote, a pink men's shirt, and an ATM receipt showing a failed attempt to withdraw $500 using Amanda's missing debit card. The receipt was traced back to a gas station near the Blackmans' home. Police discovered that one of the men had attempted to conceal his identity by wrapping the pink shirt around his face, but he forgot to take it when abandoning the car. This oversight left behind a DNA sample on the shirt, which later proved to be a critical piece of evidence. The DNA matched 21-year-old Jalen E. Watson, who had recently been released on parole for a previous burglary. Further investigation into Watson's criminal background revealed a connection to an accomplice named Dino Gordon. Both men were under parole supervision, including monitoring of their cell phone activity. By triangulating their phone signals, investigators confirmed that Watson and Gordon had been present at all 3 burglary sites that morning, including the ATM where the failed withdrawal attempt had occurred. Further investigation revealed that Watson and Gordon had made several phone calls that day, including one to 18-year-old Larry Joe Taylor Jr. This connection led authorities to identify all 3 suspects. By tracking their cell phones, investigators confirmed that the men had been together the night before the crimes. Their landlord corroborated this, stating they had left around 3:30 a.m., taking her boyfriend's handgun and a shirt with them. Both items were later linked to the crime scene, with the handgun also tied to another murder earlier that month. 11 days after Amanda's death, Larry Joe Taylor Jr. was arrested on suspicion of murder, theft, and breaking and entering. By December, Jalen Watson and Deano Gordon had also been taken into custody. As often happens when multiple suspects are arrested, tensions arose and the trio began turning on each other. Dino was the first to break, agreeing to a plea deal in exchange for providing information about his accomplices. According to him, the 3 had planned a series of home burglaries that morning, but it was Larry who suggested bringing a gun. Once inside the Blackburn home, Larry entered Amanda's bedroom while she was asleep, seemingly seeking the thrill of the act. The The situation escalated when Amanda resisted. What began as a robbery quickly turned into a hostage situation. Armed with the handgun, Larry held Amanda while the other two drove to an ATM to use her debit card. Phone records confirmed they stayed in contact throughout the ordeal. When her PIN failed, Larry realized Amanda would not comply. He then hung up, forced himself on her, and ultimately shot her 3 times as she collapsed. After the shooting, Larry called his friends to pick him up, an event captured on surveillance footage as he got into the Chrysler. Dino also disclosed that Larry appeared almost proud of his actions, even standing over Amanda as she bled out, seemingly indifferent to the tragedy. He then instructed the others to prepare for their next heist. Based on this testimony, Larry's charges were expanded to include burglary, robbery causing serious bodily harm, criminal confinement, auto theft, carrying a gun without a license, and 2 counts of felony murder. Charges that would become central to the case. It's important to note that Larry Taylor's 2 murder charges were for Amanda and another man he allegedly killed earlier that year, but they did not include the death of Amanda's unborn child. Dino honored his plea deal to testify against Larry, and Jalen was expected to do the same. With both accomplices cooperating, Larry's prospects at trial were grim. However, the legal process faced frustrating delays, including 2 mistrials caused by technicalities related to Amanda's pregnancy. Because no murder charges were filed in connection with the unborn baby, the judge ruled that Amanda's pregnancy could not be mentioned during the trial. However, since several jurors were already aware of it, the trial could not proceed normally. Ultimately, a bench trial was agreed upon, meaning the judge alone would determine Larry's fate, a decision that likely did not work in his favor. Larry was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 86 years in prison, ensuring he would never be free again. The trials for Dino Gordon and Jalen Watson took place in March 2021. Thanks to their plea deals, both were charged with 2 counts of burglary and robbery, resulting in serious bodily harm, while 5 additional charges were dropped. Jalen was sentenced to 29 years, later reduced to 15, with a minimum of 10 years to be served. Diano received a 30-year sentence, with 25 years to be served in prison and 5 years on probation. The difference in Jalen's and Diano's sentences remains unclear, especially since Dino was the first to cooperate. Their trials took place in 2021 and 2022, and Amanda's family endured 7 long, painful years before finally achieving some sense of closure. Davey, having lost both his wife and unborn child, admits that he, like anyone, experienced intense anger and struggled with negative emotions toward Amanda's killers. Over time, however, he learned to view them differently and ultimately found it in his heart to show mercy, likely influenced by his faith. Yet, Davey's quick entry into a new relationship less than a year after Amanda's death stirred controversy. He remarried within a year, which many found surprising. While there is no right way to grieve, some criticized the speed of his remarriage, though others understand that grief manifests differently for everyone. This decision fueled suspicion among critics, even though there was no evidence linking him to Amanda's death, and none of the killers ever suggested he played a role. Even as he moved forward, Amanda remained a constant presence in Davey's thoughts. In his book, he humorously wrote that one day in heaven he would introduce Amanda to her killers, giving them a chance to share their frustrations and fond memories of her. As an avid runner, Davey feels that Amanda passed the baton to Krista, a connection that, though unintentional, has helped both him and Krista find some measure of peace. Like all of Amanda's loved ones, Davey remembers her as a selfless, loving, and beautiful soul who always put others first. Her family continues to feel the profound sadness of her loss, a void that can never be filled. In his reflections, Davey described Amanda as the most selfless person he had ever known, someone who lived her life for others and left a lasting impact on everyone around her. He wrote, "She made her life about other people, and that's why people were so deeply affected by her. We all felt Amanda's love and care because she never made her life about herself. While the case has been solved, a small portion of people will likely always remain skeptical, questioning Davey's involvement. If you found this case fascinating, Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This story unfolds with fear, survival, and disturbing truths hidden in plain sight. A haunting photo made rounds on Instagram captioned, "Yes, it's real." It captured a young woman in a white top, loose black pants, and black Converse sneakers, her hair casually draped over her shoulders. That woman was Debony Escobar, and her friends and family would never see her alive again. The image spread rapidly, drawing fascination and dread from people across the internet. The photo was especially chilling because of its link to her disappearance. Reports indicated that it was taken by a taxi driver who was supposed to pick her up after a night at a house party. The location was Highway 85, grimly nicknamed the Highway of Death. Although the image served as a crucial lead, the truth of what occurred that night remained unknown. Debony Escobar was an 18-year-old law student at the Autonomous University of Nuevo Leon. According to reports, she had a boyfriend and shared a strong bond with her parents, Mario Escobar and Dolores Basaldua, both educators. Adopted at just 1 year old, Debony was raised in a loving home with a tightly knit family. On the night of April 8, 2022, she left home to attend a party with friends. Everyone expected her to return that night, but she never came back. By 8 a.m. the next morning, after speaking with her friends, her father Mario reported her missing without delay. The last known sighting of Debony was on the highway between Monterrey and Nuevo Laredo. Following the widespread attention her disappearance received online, her father later revealed that he began receiving extortion calls from people claiming to know her whereabouts, demanding money in return for information. This only added to the family's distress. Based on available information, Debony Escobar left her home around 11 p.m. on April 8 to attend a party with 2 friends, Sarai, whom she had known through social media for about 3 months, and Yvonne, whom she had just met that night. By 11:30 p.m., the trio had arrived at a meetup spot in San Nicolas on Sion Boulevard Street. A rideshare driver took them to a store where they purchased a bottle of vodka along with other items. This confirmed that Debony did consume alcohol that night. After being unable to enter a party in downtown San Nicolas, they decided to head to another gathering and requested a ride through Didi, a ride-sharing app similar to Uber. According to her friends, they booked the Didi at 12:49 a.m. on April 9th and got in around 1 a.m. Their destination was a rented house located in Colonia Nueva Castilla, a neighborhood in the town of Escobedo. They searched for another party since the first one had already ended by the time they arrived. Around 1:10 a.m., they found one at Quinta El Diamante, also located on and Monica Street. Although they didn't know the host, they were still allowed to join the gathering. At approximately 1:30 a.m., Debony left the party after a confrontation with some guests who accused her of being visibly drunk. Surveillance footage captured her walking away from the entrance but returning shortly after. At 3:45 a.m., security cameras recorded Debony running out of the party, pursued by a young man who appeared to be trying to stop her. In response, Debony struck him and attempted to flee. He blocked her path, resulting in a physical altercation. The situation escalated as more people got involved, including Sarai and another young man. Witnesses reported that Debony even bit some of those trying to restrain her. Between 3:29 and 3:36 a.m., Yvonne messaged Juan David, also known as Hughes, asking him to take Debony home. Hughes was the same rideshare driver who had dropped them off earlier. Both Yvonne and Sarai requested his help because Debony appeared to be intoxicated. By 3:54 a.m., David had picked Debony up. She entered the car quickly and seemed visibly upset. During the ride, her friend was seen speaking with the driver as the vehicle was moving. Through their text exchange, David realized he had the wrong address for Debony's home and asked her friends to correct it. At 4:17 a.m., another surveillance camera captured what appeared to be an argument between Debony and David inside the car. In the footage, Debony was seen making angry gestures, and at one point, David's arm appeared briefly near her chest. Her father, Mario Escobar, believed that David may have attempted to grope her during the ride. which could explain why she exited the car shortly after being picked up. At this stage, suspicions around David, also known as Who's, were growing. As the last known person to see DeBoni alive, the rideshare driver became the primary suspect. Juan David Suarez, a 47-year-old rideshare driver, was the one who picked DeBoni up in the early hours of April 9, 2022. He was also the person who took the widely circulated photo of her standing alone on the highway. His criminal record, which included a recent arrest for drug-related offenses, raised public suspicion about his possible involvement in her disappearance. While the Daily Mail reported that Suarez had previously been investigated for harassment and kidnapping of women, these claims were not confirmed by Spanish-language sources. Despite the suspicions, Suarez has not been officially charged in connection with DeBoni's disappearance or death, as authorities have yet to find enough evidence linking him directly to the crime. He has been interrogated multiple times, and his vehicle has undergone thorough inspection, but no definitive proof has emerged. DeBoni's friends, Sarai and Yvonne, were also initially considered key suspects in her disappearance. They faced heavy criticism from Mario Escobar, DeBoni's father, who condemned their decision to leave her alone at night. He firmly believed they should have stayed with her until she reached home safely. However, their statements were consistent with surveillance footage and WhatsApp messages, which ultimately cleared them of involvement. In their interviews, both friends said DeBoni had been behaving erratically and disrespectfully that night, though they believed she had only been drinking. At one point, they said, she locked herself in a men's restroom and even attempted to jump into a pool. Concerned for her safety, they contacted Suarez, the rideshare driver whose number they had saved earlier that evening, to help take her home. DeBoni's friends decided to leave in a separate car after she reportedly refused to go with them and insisted on being alone. Around 3:59 a.m., they also attempted to contact her father multiple times, but he didn't respond. After news of DeBoni's disappearance spread, the two friends faced intense backlash, including death threats and false accusations of being responsible for her death. On April 10, 2022, Mario D. Cruz Balderas Rodriguez, head of the local commission for missing persons in Nuevo Leon, announced the formation of an emergency committee dedicated to finding DeBoni. That same day, her family organized a large-scale search, urging friends, relatives, and locals from the area where she was last seen to join the effort. 9 days later, on April 18, newly released CCTV footage shed more light on DeBoni's final movements. After gathering more details from her friends and the driver, authorities began to piece together a clearer picture of the night's events. Just a few minutes into the ride, the driver texted her friends, saying the situation wasn't going well, suggesting DeBoni was behaving erratically and he was having difficulty managing her. At one point, he expressed concern that he might get into trouble and asked for her mother's phone number when one of the friends pleaded with him to just take DeBoni home. Her friend explained that they couldn't simply leave DeBoni alone because they didn't have her mother's phone number. At 4:25 a.m., DeBoni exited the Kia near the Nueva Castilla neighborhood, roughly 15.5 kilometers from the Valle Nuevo Laredo highway. Just a minute later, at 4:26 a.m., the driver snapped a photo of her standing on the roadside and sent it to her friends. In response, they expressed frustration, saying, "Thanks, but we don't know what to do," and explained that DeBoni had become too difficult to manage, having hit and bitten them earlier that night. Messages exchanged between the driver and DeBoni's friends also revealed that he had been drinking heavily. Despite repeated efforts, her friends were unable to reach her parents. Although Suarez offered to let DeBoni charge her phone, she declined and said she didn't care. According to the driver, he handed her the charging cable around 4:17 a.m. This was the moment DeBoni's father suspected Suarez may have groped her, an incident he believed was partially captured on CCTV. At 4:25 a.m., Suarez informed her friends that DeBoni had gotten out of the car and refused to return. He claimed she became upset and pleaded to be let out, so he allowed her to leave. When someone suggested he call the police, he said he couldn't because he had already driven away to continue working. By the time he returned, DeBoni was gone. Suarez also mentioned that she appeared to be in very poor condition and might have been under the influence of something, as she was speaking incoherently. At one point, she reportedly threatened him, saying her parents were lawyers and could have him arrested. Later, investigators obtained CCTV footage from the Alcosa Transport Company. At 4:29 a.m., the video captured Deboni walking along the road median and crossing the street. The footage showed her approaching the security booth at the company and peering inside, though she did not enter or ask for assistance. The investigation into Deboni Escobar's disappearance intensified following the release of new footage from the Alcosa Transport Company. On April 19th, authorities conducted a thorough search of the company, reviewing additional security footage and inspecting vehicles, but no significant leads were uncovered. Police also searched an apartment complex in the Conde No Constitution housing unit, located about 22 kilometers from where Deboni was last seen. This location was investigated because her phone had briefly pinged there 2 days before she vanished. Investigators then turned their attention to the nearby Nueva Castilla motel after her cell phone and GPS data showed movement in that area shortly before her disappearance. Despite the effort, the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Deboni's father, along with a group of volunteers, began searching along the Monterrey Nuevo-Laredo Highway, a route infamous for disappearances, often referred to as the Highway of Death or Highway of Hell. This stretch has seen over 100 people go missing since 2021. The search team combed through wells, water tanks, vacant lots, and nearby streams, distributing flyers with Deboni's information in hopes of uncovering any leads. Although Deboni was not found, the search led to the discovery of the bodies of 5 other missing young women: Ireland, Ingrid, Brissa, Jennifer, and Irma, who had been reported missing between April 15th and April 19th. Some of the victims were as young as 14. Their sudden discovery sparked public outrage, as many believed these cases were only given attention due to the widespread media focus on Deboni. This frustration was widely echoed on social media, where people criticized the government's slow and reactive approach, accusing authorities of only taking action when under public pressure. While looking for Deboni, they found Ireland, Ingrid, Jennifer, Brissa, and Irma, wrote Barro Sanchez, the brother of Wendy Sanchez, who disappeared in January 2021. When there's pressure, the state acts. If someone you love goes missing, you have to block roads, raise your voice, and do whatever it takes. The heartbreaking discovery highlighted the ongoing crisis of disappearances in Nuevo Leon. After a 13-day search, a body was found in a disused water tank near the spot where Deboni Escobar was last seen, just a minute away. The announcement was made by the Attorney General's Office of Nuevo Leon on the night of Thursday, April 21st. Police were alerted after staff at the Nueva Castilla motel reported a foul odor coming from one of the unused tanks. According to the hotel staff, the pool area where the tank was located hadn't been used in 6 years. Authorities quickly sealed off the scene, and shortly after, they discovered a body. At the time, they could not immediately confirm whether it was Deboni. A team of divers was deployed to retrieve the remains. The body was dressed in a white top and black trousers, the same outfit Deboni had been wearing when she disappeared. Her father recognized her by a cross she had been wearing. It was believed that her body had been submerged for nearly 2 weeks. The discovery of Deboni's remains raised serious questions. The property where she was found had already been searched at least 4 times using dogs and drones, yet nothing had been detected. This led many to question how search teams could have missed her body when it was so near to the location where she was last seen. Adding to the suspicion was the fact that the body showed less decomposition than expected, given the hot weather in Nuevo Leon at the time, where temperatures ranged between 35 degrees Celsius and 40 degrees Celsius. This discrepancy fueled speculation that Deboni might not have died the night she disappeared, but rather days later, and that her body may have been placed in the tank afterward. The motel had been one of the initial search locations, yet despite supposedly thorough inspections, nothing had turned up during the first searches. Police also requested access to the motel's security camera footage, but staff claimed the cameras didn't record and were only used for live monitoring. This raised further doubts. How could Deboni's body remain undiscovered for so long? Why hadn't the employees noticed anything unusual for nearly 2 weeks? People questioned whether anyone had seen Deboni or anyone else on the property that night, especially with a security guard supposedly present around the clock. After the body was recovered, it was transported to the morgue, where the first of 3 autopsies was conducted on April 22nd. The initial report from Nuevo Leon authorities stated that DeBoni died from blunt force trauma to the head, leading to a fatal brain injury. They suggested she may have accidentally fallen into the 12-foot deep tank located near the motel pool, possibly after climbing a 2.2-meter barbed wire-topped wall. However, that theory quickly began to unravel as the first autopsy revealed a significant inconsistency. There was no water in DeBoni's lungs, something typically expected in a drowning case. This suggested that she may have already been dead before entering the water tank. While the official cause of death was listed as traumatic brain injury after submersion, the absence of water in her lungs cast serious doubt on the drowning theory. Adding to the mystery, DeBoni's personal belongings, including her phone and handbag, were discovered in separate tanks on the motel property. This raised even more questions about the circumstances of her death. How did her belongings end up in different locations? In light of the conflicting accounts and growing doubts, DeBoni's father requested, and personally funded, a second autopsy. He strongly questioned the theory that his daughter had accidentally fallen into the tank. The idea that she climbed a tall, barbed wire-topped wall seemed highly unlikely. Investigators themselves began to suspect that the only plausible entry point to the motel was through the main entrance, which was open 24 hours a day and located next to a now-closed restaurant. The diner, though abandoned for years, was situated close to the tanks where DeBoni's body was eventually discovered. The investigation was plagued by issues, conflicting autopsy findings, inconsistent witness statements, and delays in evidence, all of which deepened the mystery surrounding her death. Each new piece of information only raised more questions, fueling public frustration and suspicion. On April 23rd, 15 days after DeBoni Escobar disappeared and 2 days after her body was found, the Nueva Castilla Motel suddenly turned over 3 CCTV recordings from 2 separate areas of the property. This was particularly alarming because the motel had previously claimed that their cameras didn't record, only provided live footage. The sudden appearance of recorded video sparked immediate suspicion. Why hadn't the footage been shared earlier? What were they hiding? Was the delay due to the motel's actions? Or had prosecutors failed to request the recordings in time? One of the videos, captured at 4:33 a.m., showed DeBoni on camera near the closed diner beside the motel, appearing to run, possibly fleeing from something or someone. The second video, recorded at the motel's toll booth, captured DeBoni passing through at 4:35 a.m. Both this and the earlier footage were found to be 2 minutes off due to the DVR system's time settings. Importantly, DeBoni appeared alone in both recordings. No other individuals were visible. The final confirmed sighting of her came at 4:56 a.m. when she was seen heading toward the tanks near the abandoned restaurant. Before reaching them, she walked in a loop, as if disoriented or unsure of her surroundings. After that moment, no further video or physical evidence was found. The tank area where DeBoni vanished was enclosed by a 2.6-meter high wall topped with barbed wire, with no clear exits to the street and no access points for vehicles. Another smaller wall, standing 2.2 meters tall, separated the tanks themselves. From where DeBoni was last seen to the first of the 3 tanks, 2 of which were uncovered, the distance was approximately 11.8 meters. It seemed unusual that DeBoni entered the motel grounds alone, especially since no other individuals were captured on camera with her. This led to troubling questions. Was she running from someone? Trying to hide? Why was she circling the abandoned restaurant repeatedly? At around 4:36 a.m., one of the same security cameras caught her peering into the empty diner. It remains unclear whether she ever approached the motel's front desk afterward. The camera tracked her movements from a distance until 4:56 a.m., when she vanished near the vacant lot. Strangely, authorities never explained how she accessed the garden area without passing through the main building, nor why she would be in such a remote part of the property at all. Adding to the suspicions, no surveillance footage was ever released from key areas of the motel, such as the front desk, even though it was reportedly staffed and operating that night. This raises the disturbing possibility that some footage might have been deleted, edited, or intentionally withheld between the time of DeBoni's death and the discovery of her body. Residents of the Constitution apartment complex discovered DeBoni's ID card 2 weeks after her body was found, reigniting questions about the case. The discovery came as police continued reviewing motel footage that showed an unidentified man entering a vehicle shortly after DeBoni was last seen. However, there was no confirmed connection between the ID card and the man in the video. On April 25, 2022, DeBoni's father requested an independent autopsy, the results of which were released on May 12. This second autopsy confirmed that DeBoni had been murdered and sexually assaulted. It revealed multiple blows to her head, effectively ruling out drowning and confirming she was already dead before her body entered the tank. The report also noted signs of sexual violence, including bruising in the genital area. Due to the conflicting findings, a third autopsy was conducted by a forensic center in Mexico City after DeBoni's body was exhumed. Released on July 19, 2022, the third report concluded that her cause of death was asphyxiation, indicating she had been smothered. However, this examination found no evidence of sexual assault, directly contradicting the second autopsy's conclusions. The conflicting reports and shifting narratives only deepened public outrage and intensified criticism over how poorly DeBoni Escobar's case was handled. As of 2024, her murder remains unsolved, and Mexico continues to grapple with the failures surrounding her death. The nation was left stunned when her body was discovered inside a tank at the Nueva Castilla Motel, a location that had been searched multiple times. Many questioned how she could have gone unnoticed for 13 days and why authorities initially claimed there were no security cameras, only to later release hours of footage. These contradictions fueled suspicions of serious errors, or worse, deliberate interference in the investigation. In January 2023, 2 hotel employees, Ana Luisa N. and Alida Urith N., were formally charged with providing false information and attempting to obstruct the investigation, further complicating the case. The motel itself gained infamy after a human skeleton was found nearby just months after DeBoni's death, earning it the nickname the Motel of Death in local media. Despite footage showing DeBoni entering the premises alone before vanishing, the exact circumstances of her death remain unclear. The investigation revealed that the motel had a troubling history and was far from the safe or routine establishment it appeared to be. Despite ongoing outrage and efforts to uncover the truth, many critical questions about DeBoni Escobar's death remain unanswered. Who was responsible for killing her? Where was she during the 13 days she was missing? Why did the driver abandon her on a stretch of road known as the Highway of Death? And what role, if any, did the motel staff play in her disappearance and death? The case has drawn comparisons to the mysterious death of Elisa Lam at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles. In both instances, young women were found dead under bizarre circumstances at hotel properties, sparking confusion, controversy, and intense public interest. DeBoni's tragic death has since become a grim symbol of Mexico's escalating femicide crisis. Just weeks before she vanished, she had taken part in a women's march protesting gender-based violence. According to her father, Mario Escobar, she joined the demonstration to help others and stand up for justice. In a heartbreaking twist, the young woman who raised her voice for change ultimately became a victim of the very violence she sought to fight. Her brutal death stands as a haunting reminder of the dangers many women in Mexico continue to face. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. On December 15, 2020, in a quiet Montana town, emergency services received a frantic call. A man, his voice shaking with fear, claimed his wife had fallen down the stairs and wasn't responding. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but what they found raised immediate suspicions. Amanda Hilius lay unconscious at the bottom of the staircase, her body contorted in an unnatural position, her face bruised severely, and her breathing barely detectable. Inside the house were Amanda's husband, Brad, his father Scott, who had been living with the couple for years, and their young son. But it quickly became clear to investigators that this was no ordinary accident. Testimonies, medical evaluations, and Amanda's own messages painted a disturbing picture of what had really been happening inside the home. Most telling of all, their 11-year-old son had witnessed more than anyone could have anticipated. Amanda Hillius had been born on January 29, 1987, in a small Montana town. Amanda's mother, Michelle, was only 16 when she found out she was pregnant, a revelation that turned her world upside down. Still a teenager herself, just beginning to dream about her future, Michelle faced the news with fear and hesitation. Yet she chose to keep the baby. Amanda's father, however, abandoned them before her birth, refusing to take any responsibility. Michelle had been raised in a strict household where getting pregnant young was seen as shameful. Her decision to continue the pregnancy deeply disappointed her parents, who withheld both emotional and financial support. Forced to raise Amanda on her own, Michelle dropped out of school and took a low-wage job to cover the basics. For a time, they stayed with extended family, but the household was filled with tension and made an already tough situation even harder. In time, Michelle understood that she needed to stand on her own. With determination, she managed to rent a modest apartment and began piecing her life back together. Despite the challenges, she poured all her love and effort into raising Amanda, doing her best to make up for the absence of a father. Amanda spent her childhood in a small Montana town where everyone knew each other. Life there was quiet, steady, and rooted in close-knit community bonds. From an early age, Amanda was sociable and cheerful, often surrounded by friends as they played outdoors and explored the nearby woods. But even as a child, she was aware that her life wasn't quite like everyone else's. Many of her classmates had both parents at home. Their mothers weren't gone all day working long hours, and there was always someone to lean on. Amanda grew to understand the sacrifices her mother made for her, and that awareness gave her a profound sense of gratitude and a strong appreciation for hard work. Throughout her school years, Amanda stood out for her curiosity and strong will. Academics came naturally to her, but she also took on household responsibilities, always stepping in to help her mother whenever possible. Despite the demands of her life, Amanda never voiced complaints or longed for luxuries. She had learned early on to value what she had and kept her sights set on building a more stable future. As she entered her teenage years, her sense of self only grew stronger. Amanda remained a focused and hardworking student, but she also began to think seriously about the life she wanted to create. Unlike her mother, who had faced hardship and instability, Amanda was determined to build something steady and secure. She avoided reckless decisions and preferred careful planning over uncertainty. During high school, she took on a part-time job after classes, hoping to ease some of her mother's financial strain and contribute however she could. Through her part-time job, Amanda developed a deep appreciation for hard work and the importance of financial independence. Her aspirations always leaned toward helping others. She had long dreamed of entering the medical field, shaped in part by witnessing the struggles of those left to face life's hardships alone. With her time split between school and work, Amanda had little room for relationships. She experienced the usual teenage crushes but steered clear of serious commitments. She was well aware of her youth and remained determined not to follow in her mother's footsteps when it came to early relationships. In early 2010, Amanda was introduced to Brad Hillius through mutual friends. From their first conversation, the chemistry between them was undeniable. Brad had a relaxed confidence, a sharp sense of humor, and a warm personality. He worked as a firefighter, a job he was proud of, finding meaning in the fact that his work was devoted to saving lives. Amanda, who had grown up relying on herself and facing life's challenges head-on, saw Brad as a steady and reliable presence, someone who could help create the kind of stable home she'd always longed for. Their connection grew quickly, fueled by shared values and a mutual desire for a grounded, predictable life. Both valued tradition, craved stability, and steered clear of chaos. From early on, Brad was a calming, dependable force in Amanda's life, someone who made the future feel secure. That sense of safety meant everything to Amanda. Their wedding was simple and intimate, with only close family and friends in attendance. Amanda had never cared for flashy displays. Her focus was always on creating a lasting home, not throwing an elaborate celebration. After they were married, their life settled into a calm and consistent routine. They spent their days working, improving their home, and making plans to grow their family. It wasn't long before Amanda found out she was pregnant with their first child. The arrival of their baby marked a life-changing moment for both Amanda and Brad. Amanda took to motherhood naturally, managing the challenges of raising a child while continuing her work in healthcare. An exhausting balance, but one she met head-on because her family was always her top priority. As time passed, their family continued to grow. After their first child, they welcomed a second, then a third, and eventually a fourth. Their home became a place of warmth, joy, and non-stop activity, the kind of beautiful, hectic family life Amanda had always wanted. She felt she had finally built the secure, loving world she had dreamed of since childhood. Yet, even amid the happiness, Amanda began to notice unsettling changes in her relationship with Brad. At first, Amanda brushed it off, thinking the changes in Brad's behavior were temporary or work-related. But gradually it became impossible to ignore. Brad was pulling away. He started spending noticeably less time at home, often citing job obligations as the reason. Initially, Amanda gave him the benefit of the doubt, knowing how demanding his work could be. However, it soon became clear that he was deliberately distancing himself from their family life. Brad became more irritable and emotionally detached. He no longer showed the same enthusiasm for helping with their children or taking part in family moments. Increasingly, he would leave without explanation, and when Amanda asked where he was going, his replies were vague or dismissive. She could feel the growing distance between them and sense something was deeply wrong in their marriage, even if she couldn't yet define exactly what it was. Brad's growing distance wasn't marked by arguments or outbursts, but rather a quiet withdrawal that left Amanda feeling unsettled. She wanted to confront him, but feared that doing so would only provoke irritation. At the time, she still clung to the hope that his behavior was temporary, perhaps just stress, fatigue, or the weight of daily responsibilities. Yet, those small concerns would soon turn into harsh reality. What began as subtle shifts would quickly snowball into something far more serious. By late 2019, Amanda stumbled upon undeniable proof of Brad's infidelity. She discovered, by accident, that he had been communicating with a woman named Riley, someone he had met through work. Up until then, Amanda had only sensed that something was wrong, lacking any hard evidence. But now the truth was staring her in the face. Brad had been seeing someone else. Amanda confronted Brad, hoping for honesty and a chance to resolve their issues together. Yet, he denied any misconduct and avoided discussing the matter. He insisted that nothing was going on between him and Riley, dismissing Amanda's concerns as baseless. Although doubtful, Amanda chose not to press the issue further at that moment. But as months passed, her worry only grew stronger. Brad became increasingly distant, spending less time at home, and when present, he acted cold and indifferent. Determined to uncover the truth, Amanda started paying close attention to his behavior and monitoring his social media. She soon spotted him leaving flirtatious comments on other women's posts. Amanda captured screenshots and saved them on her phone. When she confronted Brad again with this evidence, demanding honesty, he once again denied everything, insisting she was overreacting. Brad dismissed her concerns, saying that online flirting was harmless fun and didn't mean anything serious. Amanda tried to convince herself the situation wasn't as bad as it appeared, hoping Brad would eventually understand the impact of his actions and change his behavior. But he continued acting as if everything was fine. When Amanda suggested they see a family counselor, Brad quickly rejected the idea. By early 2020, Amanda realized things had escalated beyond repair. One day, she accidentally found messages between Brad and Riley, proving their relationship was far from over. In fact, Brad had become more careful, deliberately hiding his communication with the other woman. After Amanda confronted him, Brad stopped sharing a bedroom with her altogether, moving into another room and saying it was simply more comfortable for him. That moment marked a turning point in their marriage. Amanda no longer felt any reason to keep the relationship going, but the idea of divorce scared her deeply, especially because of their family. Then, in April 2020, something happened that would irreparably break their home. One evening, a disagreement between them spiraled into a serious confrontation. Brad grew aggressive, his voice rising in anger and intensity. Feeling threatened, Amanda tried to record the argument on her phone. When Brad noticed, he snatched the device from her and smashed it on the floor. He then grabbed her wrists tightly, demanding she stop provoking him. Amanda managed to pull away and grabbed another phone to call her father for help. On the other end of the line, her father heard the shouting and struggle, and without hesitation, he called the police. When the police arrived, Amanda was visibly shaken, but hesitant to share the full details of the incident. She acknowledged that they had argued but refrained from going into specifics. Despite her reservations, the officers recorded the situation, and a judge subsequently issued a temporary restraining order against Brad. The order also included Brad's father, Scott, who had been living with them for several years. After retiring, Scott moved into his son's home and took on some caregiving duties for his grandchildren. At first, his presence seemed like a helpful support for the young family. However, over time, Scott became another source of tension. He had a difficult personality, quick-tempered, outspoken, and often making harsh remarks without thinking about their impact. Scott's parenting style was rigid and outdated, rooted in deeply traditional views about family roles. He firmly believed that a wife should always obey her husband and openly disapproved of Amanda's efforts to assert her independence. When conflicts arose between Amanda and Brad, Scott consistently sided with his son. He dismissed Brad's behavior as acceptable and accused Amanda of overreacting. Whenever she tried to set boundaries, he would mockingly say that women tend to blow things out of proportion. When Amanda made the decision to leave and move to Oregon with her children, Scott became a major barrier. Not only did he back Brad, but he also escalated tensions by issuing direct threats. He warned Amanda that he had connections who could handle the problem if she tried to take the family away. It was then that Amanda realized she wasn't just struggling against Brad. She was also facing his father, a man determined to keep control at any cost. Following the April 2020 incident, tensions in Amanda and Brad's home only intensified. Despite the temporary restraining order, Brad continued living under the same roof and became increasingly aggressive. The order did nothing to stop the constant psychological pressure he exerted. He ignored Amanda, made demeaning comments, and would lash out over minor issues. His behavior grew more erratic, leaving Amanda more and more fearful of being around him. He no longer bothered to conceal his hostility, openly displaying his frustration. Whereas before he might have tried to keep calm, now he made his anger obvious. Slamming doors, throwing objects, and raising his voice in front of the family. Amanda recognized these actions as attempts to assert control, but she felt trapped, uncertain how to safeguard herself and those she loved. December 15, 2020 began like any other day. Amanda woke up early, before the household buzzed with the usual sounds of morning activity. Her routine typically involved getting ready quickly for work, preparing breakfast, and organizing the day ahead for her family. That morning followed the same flow. Brad remained in bed, the younger children were still asleep, and their 11-year-old son was already in the kitchen making himself something to eat. Before diving into her daily tasks, Amanda picked up her phone and started scrolling through social media. This was her morning habit, a brief moment to catch up on updates and news. But within minutes, something familiar and unsettling appeared on her screen. In her feed, she spotted Brad's comments beneath photos of other women. Once again, he was posting flirtatious and provocative messages, showing no concern for who might see them. The sight unleashed a wave of emotions within her. Not long ago, Amanda had still clung to the hope that things might improve, that Brad would stop acting as if their family didn't matter to him. But nothing had changed. He remained the same, showing no effort to conceal his behavior. Frustration surged through Amanda, and she knew she couldn't just let it go. She walked into the bedroom where Brad was still lying in bed and attempted to talk with him. The conversation began calmly but soon escalated into yet another argument. Brad showed no interest in engaging, brushing her off, saying it wasn't the right time, and trying to shut the discussion down. But this time, Amanda wasn't willing to back down. She demanded answers, hoping he would at least acknowledge something. But instead of listening, Brad grew increasingly frustrated. His tone sharpened, and his words became more hurtful. He snapped that he wasn't doing anything wrong and that her accusations were baseless. At one point, he told her that if she didn't like it, she could just leave. Those words struck her like a blow. After everything she had endured and all her efforts to keep the family together, this was his response. Her patience snapped. Overcome with emotion, the argument quickly spiraled out of control, and Brad's reaction was immediate. At that moment, their 11-year-old son, who had been in the kitchen, heard the shouting and cautiously stepped into the hallway. Though he had grown accustomed to tension between his parents, this time something felt different. He moved toward the doorway and saw his father grabbing his mother's wrist. Amanda struggled to pull away, but Brad held tight. The boy froze, overwhelmed and uncertain. Seconds later, he witnessed Brad strike Amanda across the face with an open palm, then clench his fist and hit her again. Amanda stumbled and then collapsed to the floor. The boy remained rooted in place, unable to fully process the violence unfolding before him. He watched as his mother tried to rise, but Brad was already looming over her. For a fleeting moment, father and son locked eyes. The boy instinctively knew he needed to get away. He turned and ran upstairs, heart pounding. Just before he disappeared into the safety of his room, he heard the harsh sound of his father dragging his mother down the stairs, to a place hidden from view, where no one could witness what would come next. Later, Amanda lay motionless at the bottom of the staircase. Her body was twisted in an unnatural way, her hair tangled and partially obscuring her face. A faint stain of blood marked the floor beneath her. She was still alive, but barely. Each breath came with visible agony, every movement a painful effort. It was Scott, Brad's father, who ultimately called emergency services. After finding Amanda at the bottom of the stairs, Brad desperately tried to rouse her, but to no avail. He called out for Scott, who rushed in to assist. Together, they attempted to stem the bleeding and check for signs of life. Realizing the severity of the situation, Scott grabbed the phone and dialed emergency services. On the call, he reported that his daughter-in-law had fallen down the stairs and was unresponsive. Meanwhile, Brad stayed by Amanda's side, seemingly offering aid. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed her condition. Her pulse was faint and her breathing shallow. They noted numerous injuries. Bruises and swelling covered her face and body. Without hesitation, the emergency team began providing respiratory support and carefully monitored her vital signs as they prepared to transport her to the hospital. Realizing Amanda needed urgent hospital care, the paramedics carefully lifted her onto a stretcher and rushed her into the ambulance. Brad stood nearby, his face tight with tension, silently watching as the emergency team worked. With sirens wailing, the ambulance sped toward the closest hospital, leaving behind a house marked by disorder, heavy silence, and the unsettling weight of something irreversible having occurred. Upon arrival, Amanda was admitted in critical condition. Medical staff immediately launched life-saving measures, but her vitals remained fragile and unstable. Severe injuries, a faint pulse, and alarmingly low oxygen levels signaled that her body was struggling to survive. Doctors swiftly conducted a full assessment, including a CT scan that revealed a traumatic brain injury, along with extensive bruising and dangerous swelling in her brain. Internal injuries to Amanda's neck indicated she had suffered restricted airflow, and signs of prolonged oxygen deprivation, hypoxia, were evident in her lungs. The intensive care team worked tirelessly to keep her alive. She was placed on a ventilator to support her breathing, while medications were administered to stabilize her blood pressure and prevent further deterioration. Despite their best efforts, there was no sign of improvement. For 3 agonizing days, doctors monitored her closely, but her condition continued to worsen. The brain damage was extensive, and the effects of oxygen deprivation had caused irreversible harm. On December 19, 2020, Amanda's heart finally stopped. All attempts to revive her failed, and she passed away quietly in the intensive care unit. Doctors officially declared Amanda dead, attributing her passing to acute brain hypoxia caused by physical trauma. The news shattered her loved ones. Her mother was overwhelmed by shock, struggling to accept that her vibrant daughter, so full of life just days earlier, would never return home. Her father was left speechless, and the entire family, especially their eldest son, grappled with the heavy reality of their loss. In the wake of Amanda's death, law enforcement launched a thorough investigation. The first to be questioned was Brad, the only adult witness present during the incident. He consistently maintained his story. Amanda had accidentally fallen down the stairs. He said he heard a noise, left the bedroom, and found her unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. According to Brad, he immediately tried to help her, attempted to wake her, then called for his father, Scott. Together, they contacted emergency services. Investigators started to scrutinize Brad's story, and it didn't take long for them to find serious contradictions. The first warning sign was the extent and type of Amanda's injuries. The medical examiner's report showed not only multiple bruises, but also signs of restricted breathing. Brain swelling, damage to the cartilage in her neck, and distinct fractures suggested she had been forcibly held down. Such injuries could not have been caused by a simple fall down the stairs. Further investigation revealed that some of Amanda's wounds occurred prior to the alleged fall. She had bruises on her face, contusions on her arms, and marks on her skin that indicated excessive force. All the evidence pointed to physical abuse before the fall. The most crucial witness was their 11-year-old son, who told investigators that on the day it happened, he saw his father hit his mother and then drag her down the stairs. He remembered hearing Amanda's cries and the sounds of a struggle. He also said that Brad had told him to go to his room before continuing the confrontation with Amanda. His account strongly supported the idea that Amanda had been a victim of domestic violence. But the authorities still needed more evidence. Investigators spoke with neighbors and family members, many of whom confirmed ongoing tensions in the household. Some had overheard heated arguments, and Amanda's close friends were aware of her fears and worries about her home situation. As evidence piled up, law enforcement shifted their focus to Riley, Brad's acquaintance. She was brought in for questioning, and although she initially seemed cooperative, her behavior soon raised doubts. While she denied any involvement, it became clear she was avoiding key questions and holding back information. Riley claimed she had no knowledge of the events that morning and insisted she wasn't involved in the tragedy. However, investigators found out that the day after Amanda's death, she had visited Brad's house and that they had discussed what had happened. The investigation went on, but by then, law enforcement had already pieced together a clear understanding of what happened. Brad's claim that Amanda's death was an accident didn't match the medical findings or witness accounts. Although he kept denying any involvement, the mounting evidence against him was becoming harder to dismiss. Then, just days after Amanda's passing, an event unfolded that added a new layer to the case. On Christmas Eve, December 24, 2020, Brad's father, Scott Hillius, was found dead in the shed behind his house. He had taken his own life with a firearm and left behind several notes. Brad was the one who found his father's body. He told police that shortly before the tragedy, he had a conversation with Scott. According to Brad, Scott was feeling overwhelmed, expressing that he couldn't handle the situation and was afraid of going to prison. Before going to the shed, Scott reportedly said he couldn't bear the pressure any longer. Shortly after, Brad heard the gunshot. Authorities responded swiftly and carried out a detailed investigation of the scene. They found 3 handwritten notes, all addressed to Scott's grandchildren. Surprisingly, none of the notes contained any confession. Instead, they expressed his love for the family and sorrow over the situation, but made no reference to any role in Amanda's death. This raised many doubts. If Scott was truly responsible, why hadn't he admitted it in his final messages? The letters read more like the words of a broken man than a confession to a crime. Brad quickly took advantage of his father's death to deflect suspicion from himself. In talks with the police, He began implying that Scott might have been the one who caused Amanda's injuries. Brad insisted that his father had been emotionally unstable and had previously shown hostility toward Amanda. He suggested that Scott might have been the one to attack her that day and then staged the incident to look like an accident. However, no concrete evidence supported this theory. With Scott deceased, the only person who could confirm or deny it was no longer available. Investigators found nothing connecting Scott to the events of that night. In fact, all evidence continued to point squarely at Brad. Despite his efforts to deflect blame onto his late father, law enforcement dismissed the claim. Forensic findings and witness testimonies consistently implicated Brad as the person responsible for Amanda's injuries. While Scott's suicide might have been driven by fear or guilt, it did not suggest his involvement in the crime. This development added more complexity to the case, layering in additional uncertainty. Was this a confession or simply a father trying to shield his son? The truth became increasingly blurred. What remained undeniable was that Amanda was gone, and the investigation's focus shifted to pursuing justice. Brad's trial commenced in January 2022, with the prosecution presenting the extensive evidence gathered during the investigation. Alongside medical reports, the prosecution introduced proof of persistent domestic violence. Audio recordings of arguments, secretly captured by Amanda in the weeks before her death, coupled with text messages she sent to friends and her mother, revealed a pattern of ongoing threats from Brad. Authorities also detailed the April 2020 incident that led to a temporary restraining order against him. Meanwhile, Brad's defense maintained that Amanda's death was the result of an accidental fall, claiming the prosecution's case was driven more by emotion than solid evidence. The defense highlighted the absence of clear external signs of restricted airflow and tried to suggest that Scott's suicide might indicate his involvement in the incident. However, the trial's pivotal moment came with the testimony of Amanda and Brad's 11-year-old son. He testified that he witnessed his father striking his mother that day and confirmed that Brad had hit her and dragged her down the stairs. His testimony marked a critical turning point. His account matched the medical findings, strengthening the prosecution's case significantly. After a 10-day trial, the jury deliberated for 5 hours before delivering their verdict. Brad was found guilty of intentional homicide and was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of parole. For Amanda's family, this brought a measure of justice. Though the pain of her loss remained deeply felt, Amanda's mother was awarded custody of the children, taking on the duty of raising them. The children faced the challenge of adapting to a new life without either parent. Brad sought to appeal the verdict, arguing that the trial had been unfairly biased against him. However, the court dismissed his appeal, affirming that the evidence had been handled properly and the trial conducted fairly. Ultimately, Brad remained incarcerated, while Amanda's family began the difficult process of healing and rebuilding what had been shattered.